say I won't stay in a world without love.
That was a blast of Scots, right? Right?
I wouldn't remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there you go. 1964. 1964. So let me just shift here. I'm going to shift to put myself on spotlight here. Here we go. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about that song, and we're going to talk a little bit about love today. I got my Peter and Gordon glasses on here for the session. It's just my blue blocker glasses. So it's great to have you guys on, and folks watching the recording. Love and unconditional love. So we're going to talk about love and unconditional love today, and some of the essays that are in this book that you guys are reading. So, this whole notion of love, and, when I was a teenager listening to that song, and it really, it stimulates us when we're young, and we have that love flowing in us as teenagers and so forth. And I think a lot of times that is what most people think love is. And it's not that that's not love. It's just, we're going to talk today about that and. So it's not an either or, it's a this and, a more all-inclusive sense of love, or maybe a different perspective on love than just the teenage love that we feel flowing through us when we're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. It's definitely part of what love is, and it's very real, it's genuine, and so forth. But we're going to expand on this idea in our discussion today a little bit. So I think that the teenage idea of love initially, for most of us, at least for me at the time, was a feeling. It's a feeling that we have, and you kind of feel it, and it's a thrill and so forth. And it's, as I said, it's very real. It's a genuine emotion. It's a feeling that we have. But I think it's more. I think that love is and can be more than that. And I want to explore that perspective on love a little bit with you today. So on page 44, if you guys have the book, if you want to follow along, I'm going to reference some paragraphs in different essays here from the homework. But page 44, this whole notion that love is not a feeling. It is a feeling, but it's more than that, I think, is what we're saying. It's more than just feeling good. It's more than just something that comes and goes. It's very indistinct. It's hard to nail down, but when you feel it, especially when you're in love with someone, or romantically in love with someone, like Peter and Gordon were kind of referencing there. I think it can be defined as the emotion caused by the attraction to something beautiful. I think that is it's an accurate definition of love. But I want to suggest in our discussion today, perhaps a different approach on this, because I think it could be somewhat incomplete if we only look at love as an emotion caused by the attraction to something beautiful. It certainly is that, but could it be more than that? And my memory of being with Jesus and so forth, couple of thousand years ago, his definition of love was accepting the other person for who they are, not who we wish they were, or not who we wish they would be. And I think that is, for me anyway, it resonates with me as a more inclusive definition of love, because then it becomes not so much an act of loving, which loving can be an act, but it's that, and it's not either or. It can be that, and can also develop into a state of being, really, is what he was teaching us. So what is he saying there? Essentially is saying, accept them for who they are. So don't make them into what you wish they would be. So there's sometimes I use a phrase or a concept you may hear me use sometimes, as we have an ideal image of what we would like something, or in this case, someone to be. We have an ideal image, and it's okay to have the ideal image, but we need to be cautious not to hold that person always to that standard of the ideal image of what we consider, in this case, if we're talking about romantic love, that ideal person to be our romantic life partner, or a friend, if it's a friendship, that ideal image of what we consider a friend to be, because nobody can measure up really to that kind of standard of perfection. When I say ideal image, usually people have what their ideal image is it's like a perfect person, and nobody can be that all the time, is the thing. And so I think what Jesus was saying is that accept the other person for who they are at that moment. And so we change from time to time, from moment to moment also, but accept that person for who they are at that moment, that really is what love is in the way he defined love. And of course, it includes that then we think about that, we can expand on that concept and think about it from a self-acceptance standpoint, a self-love standpoint. If we are not just accepting those outside of us, but maybe we need to accept ourselves within ourselves, accept ourselves for who we are, and that really is the real basis, the foundation of self-love, of self-acceptance. So you will hear this phrase self-acceptance used a lot in discussions, in spiritual, discussions about self-development and personal development. But what does that really mean when the rubber, meets the road, as they say? What's the acid test? The acid test of self-love is really accepting everything about ourselves, not just the good stuff. So the warts, I sometimes refer to them as, the stuff we may not like about ourselves, that whether that's a physical part of our body, or whether it's an emotional aspect of ourselves, or whether it's an intellectual or a mental aspect of ourselves, whatever it is, we need to accept and love all of ourselves, including all of that. Otherwise, it's not really true self-acceptance. It's not really true love. It's selective love. And we're going to talk about this idea of selective loving in a minute. But again, with other people, what Jesus is saying, accept them for all of who they are, not just what you like about them. Now, what about this idea that sometimes people talk about of turning the other cheek? And he has sometimes incorrectly been, that phrase has sometimes incorrectly been attributed to Jesus. He never said anything like that. In fact, he would say the opposite. He would say, loving the other person and accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were, means also recognizing and therefore accepting their flaws and their weaknesses, and then deciding within yourself whether or not those flaws and weaknesses are acceptable to you as you reflect on yourself in a loving way. So the idea of accepting the other person for who they are doesn't mean you accept their bad behavior towards you, That means it, instead, he would say, that means seeing the other person for who they are. That's what he means by accepting them for who they are. That is loving them, not trying to change them into something that they are not. And if they are exhibiting behavior that's inappropriate to what you want and need in life, then he would say, then you walk away. You go to the other side of the street, whatever you need to do in order to love yourself and respect yourself. So again, these are nuanced thoughts about love that very often are not spoken about when people just, because people very often will come to me and they'll say, if I'm supposed to love everybody, how do I love that person? Like I had one client whose father has been abusive to her through her whole life. Now she's a young adult, and she said, "How can I love him if he's been abusive to me?" And I said, "No. Love means accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. So you're not trying to change your father into somebody else. He is who he is. Only he can change himself if he wants to. You cannot change him." That's where free will comes in, and we'll get into a much deeper discussion of free will in a future session here in our series. But I said to her, you need to love yourself as you accept him for who he is, and loving yourself means perhaps drawing a boundary between yourself and him, and not allowing that abusive behavior to enter into the relationship that you have. And now you can't control him from doing it, but you can walk away and you can be in a different space. You can go be with your husband or your children or whoever, and you can separate yourself more from, in this case, her father. So it's a sad situation, and people are conflicted, obviously, in that situation. It's her father, but her father was not treating her in a humane way. So again, we don't control them, only they control themselves. I'm on page 45 now. It's not ultimately up to us, it's up to them. This whole notion is molded and shaped by who they are, what their personality is. In her father's case, his personality was what it was. And his behavior is molded by his personality, but also the choices he makes. So it's a combination. It's not just a default that, well, it's his personality and that's who he is. Well, he's making choices. Her father was making choices in how he behaved with her. So, but again, the reminder is we don't control that, only they do. And so our acceptance of who they are then frees them up to be themselves in a way that makes them feel welcomed by us, not judged by us. And I'll give you a very personal example of me and my father. Those of you who've read my first book, you've heard stories, and I tell stories in it about my dad and my relationship, and it was very strained. It was very stressful and strained, especially when I started listening to Peter and Gordon and the Beatles and all that. And when I was my teenage years and my hormones started pumping, it was a very strained relationship between my father and myself. But when I learned to meditate, things shifted. And I didn't even notice it. Sometimes you're so close to a situation, then you need a third party to tell you. So my mother told me that when I came home for Thanksgiving break from college, and then, several weeks later for Christmas break, she learned to meditate in January. So like a few weeks later, and I said, Mom, what was that about? You went and learned to meditate? How come? She goes, I saw you started getting along better with your father. I said, what? Really? I didn't even notice it. You're too close to it. And I didn't even notice that I'd start getting along better with him, arguing less with him. And what I realized in retrospect, many years later, at first my thinking was, oh, I feel less stressed, so I must be able to tolerate my dad more. So at first it was just a toleration kind of thing. But many years later, what I realized was I was accepting my father for who he was. And he was that anal retentive guy who had to turn around the soup cans facing so that it was like Campbell's soup. You could read the labels head on. And if it was 30 degrees off, he would just freak out. And so I said, Dad, you know, tomato is not spelled C-H-I-C-K. Okay, you can't see the whole word chicken noodle, but it's not tomato soup, all right? And I would just get into it. And I'm just giving you the very toned down version, the PG version of what I said to him. But, you know, I started accepting him. And so I realized many, many decades later, what I was doing was expressing love for my father in the form of accepting him for who he was, not trying to change him into something else, which is what I had been doing. Now, again, this is different from the example I just gave you with my client who had the abusive father. My father was, let's just say, difficult. He wasn't being abusive. If he was abusive, I would have taken a different tact. But in this case, he was just being difficult in my, I guess is a word I would say. And I accepted his being difficult in a, you know, he wasn't in my face. He was in our collective family face because of Campbell's soup cans and other things, which dishes went where in the dishwasher and things like that, which I just began to accept as just his silly behavior. Okay. But that's Jesus's definition of love. And I think that's a good way to, it's a good way to expand our notion of love beyond just the notion of feeling joyful when somebody gives us joy. And that is a form of love, for sure. So it's not an either or, it's an and expansion of the view of love is what I want to convey to you guys. So on page 49, now I'm looking at this whole idea of friendship. And what I wanted to pick out of this essay on friendship on page 49 in the book is this notion that all too often we tend to be selective friends with others. Meaning, this is near the bottom of the page, meaning that we tend to pick and choose. It's like selective love. It's like, no, there's no, in terms of Jesus's definition of love, accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. There's no such thing as selective love, that you're not loving the person then. In his definition, he would say, you may be selectively choosing who you like and what you like about them, but that's not love in his definition, he would say. You know, we tend to pick and choose what we like about them and what we will accept about them. So it's selective acceptance, which is not really acceptance. It's picking and choosing. You know, really all strong long-term relationships, whether they be romantic, whether they be friendship, whether they be work-related relationships, are all foundationally based on friendship, really. Isn't friendship an acceptance of the other person? I think that's a good way of looking at friendship. And on page 50, there's this concept here of what I'm going to refer to with you guys now as knowing ourselves, knowing thyself. And I talk about Jesus here as, you know, a master at many things, but primarily he was a master at knowing people, really knowing them, loving them, accepting them in this way for who they were, flawed, not as flawed, the whole range, accepting them for who they were, not who somebody else may have wished them to be, and they felt that. But what was the foundation? What's the foundation that he drew from. In retrospect, I didn't know it at the time. I was so absorbed in studying with him at the time and so forth, and when observing, a lot of the studying was observing him demonstrate to us his love for others and how he taught and so forth. But what was the foundation? The foundation was, as I say here, because he knew himself so well. By knowing himself so well, his mind was free to connect fully with other minds with whom he came in contact. So literally, we would walk down the street and he would connect with people in that, what I observed at the time, in that unique way that I had never seen a human being connect with another human being at that time, connect with that person. I'd never seen that up to that time, before in my many lives. And you could see the people just viscerally, they felt that deeply. They were touched. We were all touched. And you would see a new person who had never met him before, never been in his presence before, meet him, and they would just melt because he opened them up, because he was so opened up himself. So we can be also that catalyst to others by demonstrating to them our more grounded, foundationally firm self-knowing and self-love within ourselves. What does that mean in the language we're using today? Our own self-acceptance, our true self-acceptance of the warts and everything we love and stuff that we may not be crazy about, everything about ourselves. People can feel that. And I observed that with him, and people could feel that acceptance, and it would even transfer to them, albeit temporarily. But, in that moment, they opened up, and they would open up to aspects of themselves that they didn't even realize was happening sometimes, but we would observe that happening in them as a third party, just on the street, for example. And I've had this experience. It's something that I've aspired to since those moments, for those 3 years, 2,000 years ago. I've aspired to be that way in my own life, and I've had moments. For example, I remember being when I worked for a law firm, and I had to go around to we had a dozen offices in the big firm and so forth around the country, and I used to travel and take fly here and there. And I remember sometimes I'd take a train from Washington, D.C., where I was living at the time, up to Baltimore, to our Baltimore office. And I distinctly remember this, and this happened many times, but I distinctly remember I got in the cab one day, and it was just a short cab ride, 5-10 minutes to the office. It was fairly close to the train station, but I got in the cab and talked to the cab driver just for a very short time. And he just opened up and started telling me very, very, very personal things about himself in that very short 5 or 8 minute cab ride. And we connected. There's a connection there. And I think is another way of looking at love, as connection in that way, because what happens? There's an acceptance there. He could feel that I was not judging him, that I was not in a judgmental mode of who he was and how he was dressed, or any of that was not the important thing. It was the connection I was having with him, and just connecting and chatting with him in an open and receptive way. People can feel that from us. And many of you, I'm sure, have had that experience in your own lives, where you talk to a stranger, the dry cleaners or wherever. Or I had another experience. I remember I walked into when I was living in Austin, Texas, and the cobbler, getting my shoes rehealed at the cobbler, and just connecting with him and some other guy just standing there waiting for his shoes. And that openness, that connection with people we don't even know, we can all do that in our lives. And I think it's a way for each of us in our own unique, personal, individualized way to really spread love, more love in the world, whether we believe or agree with the other person politically or religiously or educationally, economically, pick any category. It doesn't matter. We accept them for who they are, not who we wish they were, and they feel that. That's an expression of love. I mean, I think that's a really, really deep expression of love, connection in that way. Even for short, fleeting moments, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how long it is. You know, that connection is really, to me, I get a little emotional talking about this. What really drives me in my work and in my life with my children, my family, my loved ones, my romantic relationships, my friendships, and in my work relationships as well. It's a different form of friendship. It's a different form of love than the way most people think of it, I think. So let's shift a little bit for a few minutes, talk about this idea of unconditional love. We hear this phrase a lot. People use it. I think people use it. You guys can, when we open up the Q&A in a sec, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. But, you know, I think, this is my conjecture, this is I'm conjecturing right now, my opinion. I think people use the phrase unconditional love because they really want to make it emphasize that it's like real love. It's like, you know, this is not some fleeting kind of love. This is like unconditional. It's accepting everything. And I get it from a certain standpoint, like I talk about in my essay here on unconditional love. It's on page 39. You know, I open talking about parental love, and I get it, you know, because when you're a parent, you know, sometimes the kids do stuff that's really annoying. Sometimes it's, you know, it's hurtful. Sometimes they'll say things or do things that's either hurtful to you or hurtful to others or hurtful to themselves. And we love them, the kids, unconditionally, regardless, in other words, of their bad behavior. We'll just call it bad behavior or, you know, non-thinking behavior at the time or whatever. We love the kids unconditionally. And so unconditional love, I get it in that context. It makes sense to me. I have 2 children, as some of you may know, and nobody is perfect, okay? But when it comes to other types of relationships that are not our children, I just think that it's a little bit overused. And this phrase, unconditional love, the phrase is overused. And I think it can be a little bit of I don't know, a pitfall, is that the right word? It can be a little bit of a weak point when thinking about love, because unconditional love to me implies that there's something that's called conditional love. And that's not the way that I think of love. I think of it more in the way Jesus taught, you know, as we've said many times, love, you know, accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. And if that's love, then there's no such thing as conditional love. It's not love. Conditional love, meaning I'll love you sometimes, but not other times, is really liking. If I'm using my language very precisely, it's liking. I like you sometimes. Sometimes I don't like you. Sometimes I like you. Sometimes I don't like you. Sometimes I like you a lot. Sometimes I really don't like you very much at all. You know, that makes sense to me. But it doesn't make sense to me to say, sometimes I really love you a lot, and sometimes I don't love you very much. That's conditional. So I get it. Unconditional love with children. The rest of the world, I don't think we're not going to be having world peace any day soon if it's all based on conditions, the way we accept other people. So, I suggest that we rethink this. You can still use the phrase unconditional love. I'm not saying, oh God, somebody just used the phrase unconditional love. They don't know what they're talking about. But just know, it's just we need to think about this, I think, in a different way, and especially not use it as an excuse. I guess that's the way it was when I say pitfall. It can sometimes be used as an excuse. When people like, oh no, I really love you unconditionally now, but not before I did. That would probably not be good, as we're getting married, saying that would probably not be a good part of your marriage vows. You know what I mean? It's essentially, like I say on page 40, what we're really saying is, I will love you as long as you match my ideal image of what a husband should be, or a wife, or whatever, a friend, a lover, fill in the blank. To me, that's not love. Love is already unconditional. That's the way I define love anyway. So let's talk a little bit about who we can express this love with, and open up for questions. So obviously, as I've alluded to, we can express this love, this idea of love, with many different people. It's not just romantic love like Peter and Gordon were, singing to us in 1964 in the song we played at the beginning. It's not just out of loneliness either, they said, in the song, talking about loneliness, No, we can express this love with many, many people, friends, family, relationship partners, here on earth with us right now. But I just want to touch on this other aspect of love, the idea of transcendent love, that love can be transcendent. What do I mean by that? That it can travel across the millennia and across lifetimes. This intimate connection between souls, between minds, souls, spirits, consciousnesses, all synonymous words, as you guys know, the way I use it in my teaching. But between souls across millennia, across time and space, there's this transcendency. In other words, transcendent means what? Transcendent means to go beyond. So it goes beyond the limits, we say, of our physical reality, the way we typically view time, space, physical reality. Many people view them in a limited fashion. And of course, physical reality is limited because we're not always here forever in physical reality. We die and we move on, and we can take on a different form and come back in another lifetime. And my point is that transcending all of those different transitions and stages in our eternal life as beings is love. Love is that also that energy, that connection. We can view it as also in another way, in addition to viewing love as accepting the other person for who they are, not who we wish they were, that connection with with beauty, but also just connection with a soul. So this is another way of looking at love. In that transcendent way, this deep, loving connection with the soul that can travel across lifetimes. And the depth and power of our emotional patterns that you sometimes hear me talk about in my classes, and in this case, the emotional pattern we're talking about today, of course, is love. That the depth and power that spans the universe, as I said, across time and space, is not lost. It's not lost, and it's not lessened across that time and space, because it is, in fact, energy. So it's not limited by the constraints of physical reality, right? And so we could conceive of this notion of eternal love or soulful love, eternal love for others, for another, or and it's a kind of thing you know it when you see it. You know it when you see her, when you see him. You know it, you feel it. It's like you just know it. It's a knowingness inside that, as I said, transcends time and space and physical reality. And it could be with children, sisters, brothers, fathers, mothers, friends, or lovers. You know, it's a recognition. Another way to think of it is it's a recognition of this identifiable energy pattern you sometimes hear me talk about, that mind that you may have resonated with in the distant past, and maybe now are reunited with in this now, the continual present that we're in now. And what's that clearer recognition brought about by? That clearer recognition of that other soul, that soulmate we could call her, is that recognition is brought about by our clearer knowingness of who we are inside ourselves, within ourselves. That inner clarity brings greater clarity and power in the ability to find those soulmates, to search them out. Those ancient friends with whom we wish to share our love and friendship another time in this physical plane, now in this physical life. So back full circle to that song, Peter and Gordon's song, you know, this transcendent type of love, to me, is not born out of loneliness. It's born out of a strength, the ability to find that other soul or souls in this lifetime is born out of my inner strength within myself, not my loneliness, as they talked about. They're talking about teenage love, and I get it, and I've been there. It was a few years ago, but I've been there. But that transcendent love, the ability to find and connect with that person who you've traversed millennia, perhaps, seeking out and looking for and trying to find again, is borne out by the effectiveness of that search, is borne out by our inner strength and connecting with ourselves, to not feel lonely within ourselves, to feel strong within ourselves, to really know who we are. The knowingness of oneself is what fuels that ability, you know, like putting out the energy, right? It's our energy feelers going out, and are they recognized and picked up by the energy feelers of that other soul? We could call her our soulmate, for example, right? That's really the root of it all. And then what's the effect of this? I'll close with this one last thought with you guys, and we'll open up the Q&A in a sec. What's the effect of this perspective on love that we're discussing today on our larger community? And I want to just read to you the end of this essay on page 43, where I talk about the world. And by taking this more understanding, accepting, and clearer approach toward ourselves and how we view love from within ourselves, we will be more prepared to be loving human beings towards other people, towards our lovers, partners, and friends, towards all of the world outside of ourselves. We'll be more prepared to love and, yes, accept with all its warts and imperfections our community, the world community that we are part of. So there you go. Food for thought. Questions. Let's see. I got a comment here. Take your mic. You can unmute yourself. And actually, I'm going to take myself off of Spotlight. Okay. Yes, and meditation perhaps bring a tolerance for things that might activate or trigger us. Exactly. So that the turning within, as I call my meditation technique, turning within, does do that. Exactly. Meditation can help free us up from, the phrase I sometimes use is, meditation can free us up from the binding influence of those, to use your words, triggers that can activate us and create intolerance within us of others, and intolerance within us of ourselves, of certain warts, as I call them, about ourselves as well. Exactly. So meditation is that tool, is that missing link, so to speak, that gives us that ability, that expanded ability to love ourselves, to not be triggered, and therefore then, as a foundational basis, to love others and not be triggered by what they're doing. Again, we can be, there's different, so I draw a distinction between triggered and being, and recognizing. So we can recognize bad behavior in somebody, and we may not accept that bad behavior in that, I'm going to use my client's example with her father. His bad behavior, she recognizes it, obviously, gets in her face, recognizes it, but being triggered by it are two different things. We don't want to be triggered, meaning scarred by it, deep emotional impression that's hurtful within us. We want to be more like water off a duck's back. So, which is difficult when it's, in her case, it's her father. I understand it's difficult. It's a challenge when that person is physically close to you or relationally close to you. Then it's a bigger challenge. But is it possible? Yes, it is possible to be like the water running off a duck's back, like the duck with the water running off of its back, and not being scarred emotionally by that hurtful behavior, not being triggered by it. Yes, we recognize it. We're not a robot. We recognize it. We see it for what it is, but we're not ill-affected and made sick by it, whether we're sick emotionally or even physically by that bad behavior. That's the thing. So the meditation, thank you for raising that point. The meditation is absolutely a crucial tool working from the inside out to strengthen ourselves so that that kind of external bad behavior doesn't ill affect us. And still, within the context of this discussion today of love, we are accepting that person for who they are, not who we wish they were. That is loving the person. And we can love the person and we can walk away. Like in that example, my client's example, we can accept them, in other words, for who they are, and we can walk away. They are not mutually exclusive. This is a crucial point, I think, for most people, because I get this from many of my clients. They're in relationships that are difficult and sometimes very hurtful, and they want to move away from that relationship, whether it's friends, spousal, in this case, father-daughter, or mother, mother-child, or whatever. It could be any relationship, work-related. I've been bullied at work in one of my jobs. So it's hurtful, and yet we see it for who they are, and I walked away. Okay. So I was loving in the definitional way that Jesus defined love, accepting the others for who they are, not who I wish they were. And then, because only they can change themselves, not I cannot change them. And so I moved away, and it was healthier for me, and it was probably healthier for them too, quite frankly. You know, so you know, me as a threat to them, they felt threatened. I knew they did, and I moved away to a different work relationship, or, you know, different place to work. So they're not mutually exclusive. This is probably, I think, one of the most difficult things for people to get around, get their mind around, get their heart around, that they can be a loving person and walk away. And I think Jesus's definition of love really captures and gives permission to you, to your self-love and your self-respect in being able to walk away. His definition really, to me, is the definite, because the definition of, if you're only looking at love as an expression or an emotion of a recognition of beauty in the other person, I get it. That is an accurate definition of love in certain situations. But you know, I like Jesus's definition better for in a more all-encompassing way, to allow people to just make those personal choices that they need to make to love themselves, which is really primary and key. Yes, Sharon, saw your hand.
Yeah, and I think that is the key, because when we talk about, you know, loving someone else, fully accepting, you know, their whole being, and then the walking away if, you know, something is really, you know, just intolerable. But we can't walk away from ourselves, you know. So I think it's, how can, you know, that self-love is really important, you know, while we're seeking, you know, that love. Because if we're coming from a half, not a whole, then, you know, how can we expect to know even what we want fully? So, you know, how can you be the whole you when there's like some portions of ourselves that we're not welcoming into our experience? And if we can't welcome in some of those things within our own experience, how can we even think about, you know, accepting other people and, you know, the portions that aren't really something that, you know, we would find attractive, or, you know, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
And I do agree that this, I've been doing the turning within meditation for, gosh, now it's a few years now, but it has really helped with, you know, not pushing those things away, that things within my own self. And that helps me increase the love for others. I can accept myself and accept the, you know, pieces of myself that I maybe don't like or love so much, but then I love myself, you know, besides all that, you know,
yes.
not splitting, you know, portions of myself.
No, it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Sharon. It's beautiful, beautifully stated. Yeah, you know, I think back to that, the teenage love song that we just heard at the beginning, Peter and Gordon, and the loneliness. You know, I think that when people feel lonely within, there's a lack, obviously, and that loneliness from within is very often where many people come from when they fall in love, because that person externally is often filling a gap that let's just use myself as an example, because it gets a little bit difficult to, you know, who's he talking about. So if I feel lonely inside and I'm looking for somebody to have a romantic relationship with, then I am coming from I have a gap inside me that's whatever I just call it a gap, a lack inside me. and I'm looking for somebody to fill that lack. And oh, now I don't feel lonely anymore. And now, but maybe in my selecting somebody to fill that loneliness that I have inside, to use the Peter and Gordon song word, lyric, is I'm not recognizing other things about that person that are not going to be good for me, but they fill the lack of loneliness right now. And so we see that time and time again in relationships. And I'm sure I may be speaking to some of you out there who are watching this recording at some point in the future, and where you know what I'm talking about. We've gone to this relationship and that relationship, and we've come from a place of lacking inside, what they called loneliness in the song, but a place of missing something. And it's not that anybody is ever perfect. So I don't want to portray this notion that, oh, but you got to wait till you're perfect and really complete inside before you can have a relationship with another person. No, but we need to take care of some fundamental needs that we have about ourselves. And we need to come from relative, it's never 100% state of fullness, but a relatively full state within ourselves. And then we will attract and find somebody. People use the word attract, but we will search out and find somebody. We'll attract, because why? Because our energy feelers, it's like we're all walking around with antennas. You just can't see the antenna. You know what I mean? We have antennas sticking out of our heads. And it's like, our energy is we are energy life forms. That's what we are as human beings. And our energy is going out. That means all our thoughts and emotions are all energy. They're all going out. Our desires are all energies. They're all going out. And some people are picking up on them, and other people are not picking up on them. And some people, they tune, that other radio frequency out there that is going to resonate with you is going to pick up on some of those frequencies some of those signals that you're putting out from your frequency. So you think about it that way. Well, if you're sending out a frequency, a desire that you're lacking, and that you need to fill that desire, that other person may have a similar need, and that's okay. It may match up, but so that may be a good thing. But what else is coming along with that package? That's the other part of this that we need to be consciously aware of, is the other aspects of the package that come along with that person who's filling the need that you may have. Okay? And so what we're saying here is, by turning within and connecting with ourselves, and in that, what we talked about earlier in a discussion today, knowing ourselves from the inside out better, we have more clear thinking. We have more clarity of mind to discern, to see and decide and assess and judge, quite frankly, how much in alignment that person will be with us in terms of meeting our needs. Not just the immediate need of desperate loneliness that we want to fill in the Peter and Gordon song that we heard earlier, okay? But more than that, don't we want a life partner more than that, Okay? So that's Elaine, yes.
I just want to tell you about an experience, what I think unconditional love is, or what
Yes.
I experienced.
Yes.
I was in a 12-step program years ago,
Mm.
and I was in an Al-Anon program. And the 12-step program, you do have to face yourself with an inventory. But the closest thing I can say, and it made me cry, you go to an AA meeting, and you have somebody walking in that society has said, we don't want you anymore. Family has said, we don't want you anymore. They come into those rooms and they're said, they are told, welcome, we're glad you're here. that to me, I mean, it makes me cry now.
Mm,
That's unconditional love because these people know they've been through it themselves. They looked within,
right.
know that they're not, but have worked a program and they also do the meditation and that too.
Yeah.
And all they want to do is extend their hand and say, yeah, we know. And we're glad you're here. To
Yeah.
me, that was the closest thing to unconditional love I think that I ever experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. It's accepting the other person for who they are. That's
And
what you're,
yes.
where they're at that moment. It's not saying you can come to this Al-Anon meeting after you get your act together in a week or so.
Right.
Oh, right now,
Absolutely.
right
Absolutely.
now. It's right now, right? It's where you're at now. It's at
So
that moment.
powerful, Elaine. Thank you for sharing that.
Really powerful, Elaine. Thank you for sharing that. It's it's a great example. It's a great example. You're accepting that person, like you said, Elaine, who has not been accepted by their family, their friends, or who knows what,
Well, yeah, society.
society in general. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. We do a terrible job at this societally, worldwide. We do a terrible job at this.
Yeah.
We're very good at this kind of isolation, like we isolate. It's like when you go to your room, it starts with kids, bad parenting, what I consider bad parenting. You crying, you just go to your room. I don't want to see you cry. Go to your room. Parents, those kind of, that's, to me, that's bad parenting. Like instead of embracing the child and saying, what's going on? Let's talk about this. Just tell me what's going on. Did I upset you, or did somebody else, or I upset you? Well, let's talk about that. It's just, I'm sorry, what happened? What did I do? And, that is that kind of acceptance that you're talking about when somebody like that walks into a room of strangers, like you say, in the Al-Anon meetings, in the AA meetings. They're strangers, you don't know these people, and they accept you.
It's beautiful. It's really beautiful I mean, it's the low lives, what they consider low lives in society.
Terrible.
They're the most giving. I mean, they get into a program and they blossom like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
But it's the most humbling and beautiful experience
Yeah.
to yeah, to see and to
Yeah. It's a terrible, it's a terrible way to treat other people the way we do in our society. I mean, and I think that, this humbling comes from experience, and people very often, not always, but very often, people who are, the phrase born with a silver spoon in their mouth, just everything is handed to them. Everything is worked out, perfectly in their lives, seemingly, don't have a sensibility for others, people's challenges and pain and so forth. You guys know from reading my first book, maybe, I've been laid off 5 times since I was 50 years old. And then before that, what you don't know, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to put this story in I'll tell you this, you're going to get a preview of my 4th book, which is my memoirs. I was out of work for a while, and I was just cobbling things together. So I'd already graduated from Dartmouth, Yale Graduate School, and Boston College Law School. All right. I was in between jobs, and I had moved across country with a young family, my wife and my son, who was then a year and a half old. Okay. He's now 33. So you can do the math, how long ago this was. So daughter was not born yet. So we had one child, and I knew nobody in the San Diego community except my sister-in-law and brother-in-law. And I was working for a temp agency, and I stuffed envelopes all day for an advertising. They sent me out to an advertising agency to work. And I worked, I think I worked 2 days or maybe 3 days there or something, making minimum wage, At the end of the second or third day or something, the manager of the advertising office came to me and she said, Kelvin, all she knows is my name. Okay. She just knows my name. And I came from XYZ temp agency. And that's all. That's all she knows about me. She doesn't know anything about my background, where I went to school, what jobs I've had. They don't care. They just send me a body, stuff envelopes. I stuffed envelopes for 2 or 3 days. Folded, an 8.5 by 11. Those of you who don't know what that means, you're too young. You take an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, you fold it in thirds and stick it in an envelope. That's what I did all day for like 2-3 days. Okay. 8 hours work day. She came up to me at the end. She says, Kelvin, I just want to tell you, you were the best envelope stuffer we've ever had. I was just like, you talk about, so I just was trying to get a little extra money on the table to feed my family. All right. And so when you have experiences like that, it gives perspective in life that a lot of people just don't have. I was making $5 an hour, minimum wage, $4.75 an hour, whatever it was then. You are the best envelope stuffer we've ever had. So, the idea that we can accept other people for who, and she was accepting me for who I was at that moment. You know what I mean? But I needed to accept myself also at that moment. To Sharon's point, accepting myself, and fortunately, by then I'd been meditating for, I'd been meditating for 30 years or so at that time or something. Yeah, 30 something years at the time. So I just laughed I chuckled inside, but she was genuine. She really meant it. She wasn't being sarcastic. She was 100% genuine and said it to me in a very loving way. And I appreciated what she said, but I chuckled to myself inside as well. We need more of that in the world is what is the thing. More of her action and more of my reaction, because sometimes some people, if they don't have a handle on themselves and somebody said that to them, they'd get all pissed off at them. Really? You don't know who I am and blah, blah, blah. That's the kind of person who really doesn't know who they are. They think they are their college degrees and all this other stuff. That's not who we are. Knowing ourselves is knowing ourselves in a deep, intimate, emotional, psychic, energetic, personality-based way. That's what I mean when I say, know thyself. Yeah, all this stuff that I've done in my life and careers that I've had is over. That's part of me. But the fabric of who I am essentially inside, that's who we need to know ourselves. That's who we are. We are not our jobs. We are not the fact that I worked stuffing envelopes, so I didn't identify myself with the job. If I had, I would have gotten pissed off at her. She was genuine in her praise for me as the best envelope stuffer they'd ever had at the ad agency. But, this is where it starts. It starts from inside. And that's what I observed with Jesus, is that he knew himself so well. That's the paragraph out of that essay that I read to you. That's the key paragraph out of there, is that how well Jesus knew himself. People all think, oh, I want to be like Jesus. You hear this. I hear this from some of my clients who are very, Christian, obviously, and religiously oriented, which is fine, which is great. I embrace everybody's, whether they're Muslim, Christians, Jews, Sikhs, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, agnostics, it does not matter. And whoever I'm leaving out there, I apologize, but I include everybody in the community that I help. But often the Christians will say, they'll say, I want to be like Jesus. Well, Jesus said, seek the kingdom of heaven within. That means turn within. That means connect with oneself within, is what he's saying. I've translated that into 21st century language, and I call it turning within. I don't want to have my teaching sound like it's a Christian teaching, because it's not. It's a worldwide global teaching, regardless of religion and culture and so forth, as you guys know. So I call it turning within. But that's what he meant when he said, seek the kingdom of heaven within. Turn within, go inside, strengthen oneself, know thyself in this deep, intimate way that you know, the group that you're talking about, Elaine, Al-Anon, is encouraging people to do. I don't know if you know this, Elaine, but one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, maybe both of them, but I know one of them for sure, in the 1960s learned the meditation technique that I teach. So,
Really?
yeah.
Bill W. or Bob? Dr. Bob. Do you remember?
What's the two names?
It was Bill W. He's the one that him and Dr. Bob are the two that actually. There was another one too, but he passed away. It was Bill W. and Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob was a doctor.
He was a
And he was
doctor. Yeah.
really-
I don't know which one. Are they both still alive or both passed away?
No, they would have passed by now, but they
Yeah.
would have been around in the 60s. Yeah, for sure.
They were around in the 60s though. Yeah. Yeah, they learned in one of them, maybe both of them, I'm not sure. And I'm not sure which one, but I know for sure one of them did. I know people who knew him. So back then, you know.
Yeah. He had an experience, like a quote unquote spiritual experience. That's how AA got started.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. Yeah.
It was Bill W.
It was Bill W. Yeah.
Yeah, Bill W. Had been trained in TM and found it helpful.
Yeah.
He was a fascinating man, if you read his biography.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know any of them, but you know, I obviously know their work.
I didn't know them personally, but I read their biography, and to start a movement that is so worldwide,
Yeah.
kind of amazing, actually.
Oh yeah.
I like the content, and you know, and two, like, you know, step 3 is you give your life and well over to the care of God as you understood him, what you're teaching, as
Right.
you understand God to be. They
Right.
didn't have any religious affiliation or anything. So
Yeah, it's very cool. You know, I've had, I don't know, out of the 5,000 or something people I've taught meditation to, I've had many hundreds who've gone through their program, some version of the program, AA or Al-Anon or whatever. Yeah. Or parents of, et cetera, you know. So no, that's great. I'm glad you raised that, Elaine. Thank you for sharing that. Hazel, great to see you here. Do you have any questions? I know you joined us a little bit later on, and you can watch the recording later, but any questions?
No, thanks, Kelvin. I was just in another meeting to help with my other problem, I tell you.
Yeah, I hope that's working out okay. So no, but feel free to ask anything, even though I may have talked about it in the talk. Just go ahead. It's always good to hear from you.
Yeah, no, I really resonate with what Elaine's saying about being accepted and for who you are, rather than what you have, what you've got in the bank. You know, it's
Right.
so important to just be appreciated for who you are. And you know, not for and what you said resonated with as a parent. You know, I came home one night and I wasn't feeling good. I was feeling low, and my dad was sitting at the table, the dinner table, and he said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "Well, I don't feel good." And you know, I couldn't talk to him, so I just went to my room because he couldn't handle emotions.
Yeah.
And I don't think that helped, obviously.
Right. Right.
So, you know, whereas you said you'd the way you said you'd handle it with your son or daughter is totally different to the way my dad, he couldn't handle emotions.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're very deficient. as a world culture, the larger we are
Yeah.
really deficient emotionally. We are emotionally handicapped. We really are. And that's why, healing professionals like Sharon have such a, they'll never be out of work, quite frankly, just doing therapy work with people, because we are, unfortunately, I say that, but that's the reality. We are so emotionally handicapped.
Mm.
And it's worldwide. People think, like you're in the UK, we're in the US, and people think, oh, it's Europe or it's the US, it's Western, it's worldwide. I'm working with people in 48 countries. I get calls from kids, 16, 17. The youngest I think was 15 years old, from Asia, a country in Asia. And I said, do you have a support system you can talk to? Your parents? I said, no. My parents, if I talk to my parents about this, they'll yell at me. I can't talk we can't, in our culture, we can't talk about whatever their issue was. And it's just, we are handicapped worldwide, and it's a problem. It just, because the inner creates the outer. And if we're not dealing with our inner issues, then it gets magnified in our outer behavior and so forth. And we see it from time to time. Unfortunately, we got this 24/7 news cycles now. We see it all too often, even when this is, just a single incident here and there. It makes it feel like to people that it's happening all the time, wherein it isn't. It's not as bad as it's not, I'm not denigrating the negative things that happen or people get hurt and so forth. But the 24/7 news cycle also creates an extra level of fear that I think it just feeds this insecurity that we're talking about inside, or this disconnect, or this emotional handicapping. It unfortunately feeds it. It doesn't help it. That extra information. That's why I tell some of my higher anxiety students, some of you may have heard me say this, I say, turn off the news. Don't watch so much news. It's just the 24/7 news cycle. I mean, if it's really important, you'll hear about it, or turn it on every once in a while, and you probably see it twice. That one time you turn it, you know what I mean? Instead of watching it all the time, and you hear it the same story 50 times. It's not healthy. We need to let go and turn within, connect within ourselves, and live our lives. Yeah, Sharon.
And
Please.
I think when you said with the love, and when we make decisions out of fear, out of scarcity, it's what we need in that moment. Like, let's say you know what, I married him because he made a lot of money, or her, and then all of a sudden, once he is making money, then it's, I don't really I don't know if I pick the person, or I, or for security reasons or whatever. And that's why it's like, even if you hear like, I chose this job because it was the only one around, and then we're in this career we don't love, so when we're choosing things from that state, have you ever heard of people say, oh, I married this person, but they're not the same.
Right.
They're not that same person. And maybe they're not, or maybe they changed, maybe you changed, or,
Right.
I don't know. I hope that makes sense. And I think you're right. The biggest thing we can do to get closer to that self-actualized love, that we're calling, love, not conditional love, because if it's conditional, it's not love. So unconditional love, just being love.
Right.
The first thing is being that self-actualized person ourselves. So the best thing, I think it's actually Ram Dass statement, is the best thing that I can do for you is work on me.
Yes. No, it's great. It's great. It's beautiful. Thank you. Great way of framing that, Sharon. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's exactly right. Ram Dass is right. The best thing I can do is for me to, strengthen myself, work on myself. And we are a continual project. We, each of us, are we work on ourselves for eternity. So like I said, we're not waiting for ourselves to be perfect, but we need to work on ourselves. And those who are not, I mean, one fundamental threshold for, let's say, a romantic partner would be somebody else who was also committed to working on themselves, because that would be at least a starting point. It's, again, that's
Yeah.
not,
And if the partner isn't, wanting to work on themselves, then it could be seen as, oh, you're selfish. You're working so much on yourself. You're working on self. What about me? What are you doing for me? And then it's not, hey, let me take this time to self-reflect and also work on myself.
exactly. Yeah, the way I,
Elaine has another comment too. I'm sorry. I don't
oh,
mean to
the-
monopolize the floor here.
No,
Okay,
go
continue.
ahead, Elaine.
Keep talking. Keep talking.
Elaine, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
I think we're in an age of emotional intelligence, to be quite honest with you. Have you ever noticed a baby or a young child?
Hmm.
They can go through emotions. They can cry 1 second, they're happy, they're sad. They go through these, that's part of being human. They flow through them. They're not stuffing anything. They're just,
Yeah.
that's why I think babies are so, I'm attracted to them, because I thought I can remember being like that.
Yeah.
Until we're told that certain emotions are bad.
Yes.
You're not supposed to feel sad. You're not supposed to feel anger. You're not supposed to feel anything, just the good ones. So we've never learned to, for me, I can only from my experience, I was always told you shouldn't feel that way. It's like, okay, I was a good student. We learn to stuff, and these emotions, we bury them. They don't go away. And that is what the TM and the meditation is so good for. You're saying it's a healing. That's what I think it is this energy that has been stuffed for so long, that, emotional intelligence, we do this to our kids because we can't handle our own. We
That's right.
can't handle our own. We
Yeah.
haven't learned to integrate it and to so I think parents are the way that they are is because that's all they've known themselves.
Right.
We are kind of what we're taught until we by some act of grace, we think there's got to be more to life than this.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you one thing.
Sure.
The statement that Jesus say, and I don't know a lot of the Bible, but for some reason this stuck in my mind.
Hmm.
We suffer the sins of the fathers.
We suffer the sins of the fathers, are we saying?
Of our fathers.
Or our fathers.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't recall him saying that. I would question whether he ever said it.
Okay. I remember seeing it at some point in time.
Yeah, it may be in the Bible, but not everything in the Bible is accurate.
I
So
guess the way I took that is that, we grow up in a certain environment and we kind of take on what we see. We're so,
sure.
kids are so open, they're malleable, and they take on certain traits.
Sure. I mean, I think the principle is, yeah, I think the principle is what you're saying.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
I think the principle is what you're saying. I don't know whether he said it or not. Whether he said it or not doesn't really matter. The Bible is written by many, many people, but I think the principle is what you're saying. And I would say further that we're not saying, certainly I'm not saying here that we need to blame the parents for their weakness in their ability to parent, because they, like you said, are to some extent, in this quote that you're stating here, are products of their previous history too. But that said, the but is that we always, as individuals, can self-reflect, can turn within, and can change. That's a choice. And then some people will choose not to change. That's also a choice. That's a choice.
Like
So those are choices that people make. So even if, look at me and my father. My father, I'm very different from my father. But the fact that my father was the way he was, and my father had two emotions: anger and joking around. That was it. There wasn't a lot in between, right? And so he could joke with not so much with us, but with you. He didn't, a third party he didn't know, or he knew just as a friend. He would joke with you, and you would think, wow, this guy's a really cool guy, da 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 da. Well, it's kind of tough living under the same roof with him, okay? Because it was anger or nothing. That was it, okay? You were either doing it his way or you weren't. And if you were doing it his way, he was neutral. If you were not doing it his way, whatever the what was, fill in the blank, he was pissed off, okay? So, but I have chosen to not be that. We're not always the product of our parents or our history and so forth. We can make choices ourselves and choose to take a different path or educate ourselves in a different way, et cetera, et cetera. But you're right. There is a definite influence by parents on children for sure. And they can mess them up, no doubt.
Well, I'm not blaming, and I'm not blaming my parents or anybody's parents.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point in time, growing up is taking responsibility.
Yes. No, I wasn't saying you were. I just wanted to make it clear to my larger audience out here.
I was just,
yeah. Yeah. I want to make sure that I wasn't being harsh. I wasn't seen to being harsh. But Sharon, you got another point? Yes.
Yeah, I really like what Elaine said with the baby and the emotions, and like somewhere along the line, we're taught don't feel bad. Why not? The kid comes home, he fails a test, or another boy or girl beats him up, and then, oh, don't feel bad. Why not? Why can't we feel bad? And then we become ashamed of those feelings because we are feeling bad, and then we're not validated. But then on the flip side, and this is personal experience, my dad too maybe had more than two emotions, but definitely loved his anger. And so for the longest time, I was like, I can't be angry. Angry is not a good emotion. See the judgment there. And now I've grown to say, you know what? No, just like the baby, right? Like, it's okay to be angry. If something makes me angry, I'm not going to be afraid of it. So even, how we experience the emotions from our, our primal relationships, and how that affects and limits our emotions of what we allow ourselves to experience. And I'm just at the point where I just want to experience all my emotions that come up. If it comes up, and my feelings that come up, sit with them, acknowledge them, and hopefully in a non-judgmental way. But it does take work though. It takes time. Meditation really helps.
Yeah.
But Elaine, I really enjoyed that with the babies.
No, it's a great point. Thanks for bringing back to the baby point, Sharon, because it reminded me, because it to say that, you think about when babies come in, they are in that more the way Jesus defined love, accepting people for who they are, not who you wish they were. Babies are in an acceptant mode. They're open. They're just coming in from the other side, basically. They are basically, they are just coming in from the other side. And so they're imbued with that. That's that acceptance, that love and acceptance. So people always say, babies are so loving. It's true. They accept it. And then what happens is they go to school, and then all of a sudden you got to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. Okay. You can't just get up and go to the bathroom. You got to raise your hand. I don't know if they still do this in school, but when I was in school anyway, you had to raise your hand. I'm in kindergarten. I got to go to the bathroom. Okay, Kelvin. Yeah. What do you want? Okay. You can go to the bathroom. It's like all these structures, in other words, whether it's raising the hand or anything else, whatever it is, this structure, you got to be at school at a certain time and so forth. It's not like that before. And so all of that starts to create, boundaries that are necessary from a school, let's just use school as an example, standpoint. But we need to, I think societally, culturally, what would be helpful in our world culture is to bolster the emotions, as Sharon was saying, using some of Sharon's ideas there, along with that, because we can't just say, okay, you can come to school anytime you want. We need to have some structure. I get it. But when you come from a place of being so open, like the little kids are, 1, 2, 3 years old, 4 years old, and then 5 years old, they go, boom, structure. It's like, what? Wait a minute, what happened? you know. So there, I think that's what, that's what happens with the kids, Elaine. But and that's why
And Kelvin, before there was school, there was apprenticeship or homeschooling,
yeah,
and we there was some structure. Some of it was very unstructured structure. This past year with COVID, and there were many kids that actually did flourish in this environment. Some kids didn't. They wanted to go to school, but some kids actually are like, including my 15-year-old. He actually did better academically, at home. He said he didn't have that peer pressure. He didn't have all the other pressures. Oh my God, what's my locker combination, anything. And I guess that relaxed atmosphere really helped him out. But I'm not saying for every kid, but for mine, and I've heard several other stories. But there will be more structure, in September.
No, it's more interesting. Yeah, exactly. No, this is a beautiful discussion. It's a great discussion. Anything else, Hazel, Elaine?
I was going to say about babies and animals. They're so similar because they're innocent.
Yes.
They're open, they're accepting. And I think that's why I have from babyhood had this relationship with animals, because unconditional, they're just there. You accept them as they are, you look after them, they accept you. It's the most beautiful relationship, and with babies, as you say, they grow up and they learn other ways, and that natural part of them goes, the openness and the innocence. But that is how the world could be if people, as you say, people wanted to, they'd have to choose that.
Yeah.
But that's what keeps me going, is that unconditional, like I was saying, my pet's very ill at the moment, but whatever happens, she knows I'm there for her. She's there for me. You know what I mean? It's just a lovely relationship where you're looking after someone you love and you're going to get them better. And you have to just go through the pain.
Yes.
Not avoid the pain.
Not avoid it, because that's the unconditional part, right? That's the acceptant part. We accept them. They're sick. They're not well, and we're there for them when they're not well. We're there by their bedside when they're not well. Arguably even more so when they're not well. But that's that unconditional. It's not just when they're healthy. So, but you're right, and the animals do have that childlike, we call human childlike kind of commonality in terms of that innocence and the acceptance. And it's our pets can often be our children in that respect. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's what it meant, be like a child again.
What's that, Elaine?
Be it like a child again. That's another phrase that I heard.
Oh, be like a child again. Yeah.
That vulnerability, that openness, which is not always easy. And thanks, Sharon, for expressing the need to be able to feel what we feel. And I think you've mentioned that too, Cal, like the sadness.
Yes.
That's a human emotion. It's there. It's not that's who we are, but we definitely are feeling it in the moment.
Sure. Yeah. We need to, we're very bad culturally worldwide at allowing ourselves, as Sharon said, to feel, and as you're saying, to feel all of our emotions, the full range of our emotions. That's it. It's not like, oh, this is a good emotion, that's a bad emotion. It's like, no, emotions are not, like you just said there, Elaine, they're not who we are, but we have them, and we're not robots, and we need to experience, and we can experience them. The distinction that I make is, are we overwhelmed by them? Are we absorbed by them? Do they own us? No, that's not a good state to be in, because then we become paralytic. We can't think clearly, you can't act, we just hunker down in the cave and we can't interact with others and so forth and so on. That's being overwhelmed. So that's not good. But the emotions themselves are independent from us, and experiencing the full range of whatever they are, whatever is spontaneously happening at that moment is what it is. And we should never, in my opinion, resist anything that's happening at that moment. That's what being present is. And that's also loving ourselves. Loving ourselves when we're angry is, in other words, accepting that is also a form of self-love, you know?
And Kelvin, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna have to hop off here, but
Yeah.
and also I'm learning, you know, because when you're in school, they give you the little, sometimes, you know, the little feeling wheel, and on one side is happy, on one side is sad, and you know, it's like a choice. But you know what? You could be happy and sad. It doesn't have to be an either or.
Yes.
You could be angry and, you know, feeling good too, or whatever, you know?
Yeah, you could be angry and calm at the same time. No, it's a great point. It's a very subtle, nuanced point that Sharon's making, but it's a really important point, because really at the essence of what she's saying, what you're saying, Sharon, the reason, the ability, it may sound paradoxical to some people listening, they go, how could you do that? The way that that can possibly happen is when the connection within oneself of who one is so strong, that we are the experiencer of our life. The experiences are experiences that I am having. They do not define me. The anger is not who I am. Then I can be pissed off and content and calm and have inner peace at the same time. Most people cannot. Most people, if they're pissed off, they are pissed off inside and disrupted inside. They are not calm. They're not feeling at peace inside. All right. If you're firmly grounded within inside and rooted, grounded, foundationally, connected, all of those are synonyms, the way I'm using them, connected with inside, within who you, with who you are in this turning within way, connecting with our essential nature, which is my mind, my consciousness, my soul, whatever, then whatever the experience is, whatever the emotion is, anger, sadness, like when my mom died, 39 years ago, where I don't lose myself in the experience. That's the thing. That's what Sharon's saying, basically, right? I just reframed it, but it's a beautiful point. Very subtle, nuanced point. Powerful point, very powerful. Well, thank you, everybody, for being on. And it's great to have this discussion. It was a really lively, great discussion. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. What are we talking about in a couple of weeks? We are talking about, well, it's not a couple of weeks, but in the next, are we talking about, let's see, the next one is, well, you'll get an email from me. The next one is June 19th. June 19th. I think we're talking about the nuances of forgiveness. I think that's the next one, but whatever it is, you'll see.
Thank you, Kelvin.
Great to see all you guys. And people have questions, feel free to reach out to me after this, after you see the recording. And I'll send this recording out to you later today. Okay?
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Sharon.
Great
Elaine.
conversations.
Great conversation, great discussion. You guys be safe, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.